for the thank you for the activities meeting, and we're very pleased to have Shawn, one of our own, homegrown, as it were, kind of, KC1NQE of POTA fame and Shawn fame, to talk to us this evening. I believe the topic is amateur communication. Is that close to the actual title?
It's kind of the evolution of communication, and amateur radio is part of it.
Okay, the evolution of communication. Excellent. All right. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? Shawn, do you want questions in the middle, or save them for the end, or what?
You can toss them in the chat, put them at the end, or either you or Rob can moderate for me. That would help the crew.
Right.
Rob
is the moderator, so I'll just turn it over to him and you.
So everybody put it in the chat if you can. Makes it easier to queue you up. And if not, we'll save it for the end. Up to you, Shawn.
All right. Am I able to share screen?
You are a co-host.
Awesome.
While he's doing this, I would ask everybody to mute if you could, please.
All right. So... Oh, it takes away my screen. That's not fair. Everybody able to see the screen with the Meriden logo?
Roger that.
All right. That's actually a good thing, because that's started the presentation of, hi, can everybody hear me? Can everybody see me? This is part of communication. And why do we do it? Why do we like to communicate? Why are we human beings in a social order that actually wants to interact with others? With that, I personally like to keep creating one new quality experience. Meeting new people is fun, interesting, and one of the reasons why I became a ham is to kind of understand a different culture. And we have our own culture as radio operators, and the way that we communicate. We have our own language, our own lexicon, things that we share as experiences with each other. So it's social connections. We want to meet the emotional needs, get attention, greet people, tell the jokes, kind of tell the stories of our lives. We want to be known, be heard, be seen. With that, we're also sharing the information. We have the nets. We do POTA activations. We do different activities that pass the information. So we're noticing other people. We're passing the pertinent information of what's happening in our daily lives. We're also doing it to request information, tell people our needs, or also tell people what we don't want happening in our lives, to request help and assistance of stuff. Now this is where it kind of gets a little interesting. So going way back, we start off with Homo habilis. They were kind of our tool makers, and they evolved into Homo erectus. If you look in the kind of like center branch of the tree, you'll see us kind of the Homo sapiens waving at the top there. And that's where language really starts kicking off, is with the Homo habilis. They were able to make certain sounds, usually about 11 different guttural sounds in their throats. And through that, we all know that you only really need two sounds. You need an on and off, a 0 and a 1, to create a language. So with that, there are roughly 4,000 written languages and 7,000 spoken languages. In English, there's 44 sounds for the 26 letters that we have. And despite there being just 26 letters in the English language, there are approximately that 44 sounds, also known as phononyms. And these 44 sounds help distinguish one word or meaning from another. Various letters and the letter combinations known as the graphemes are used to represent the sounds. Now, humans can't always be present to pass on information, and we know this as hams because we like to talk long distances with the least amount of effort possible, lowest power possible. So the first forms of writing were put into clay, pressed into the stone, and different mediums were used, papyrus after that, or wood. And we use modern day paper, cloth, and we also have digital formats, which weren't accessible back in the Stone Age. And we actually have gone full circle from hieroglyphs to emojis, both pictographs. With that, we also have gesturing, which can be done from a distance. It's a cultural reference as far as a gesture. Wars have actually been started over an incorrect gesture where it means one thing in one country and something in another cultural group. But there are a lot of universal signs that humans know, like you're waving towards, you're trying to bring somebody close to you, or if you're holding up your hands away and kind of pressing back, another human, regardless of language, will pick up on that nonverbal cue. Now, other forms of being able to communicate and have a sense of community has been through artwork. Earliest cave paintings show groups of people gathering, different activities that they've done as a collective, and it's not indicative to one part of the world, it spans the entire world, the idea of wanting to be together to be able to communicate and pass on information and knowledge. And we also do this through visual and auditory, through music, through song, through dance, and things that were done in old times are still done in modern days. A signal fire that would have been lit is pretty much the same technology that we use today to signal troops that are in a war zone. You can pop smoke there, or you can, with music, we have the air raid siren versus a warning whistle. So it's a upgrade in technology, but it's still the same basic concepts that our ancient ancestors came up with. Animals were also used for long distance communications. In the 776 BC, the Greeks, the Romans, and the Persians all started using pigeons as forms of long distance communication because their empires were getting so large that a single human could not travel that distance within a certain amount of time. So using animals that had the ability to travel farther in a shorter amount of time became ideal. And it's still used today, unfortunately, for more nefarious reasons. Drug dealers or information passers that want to circumvent some sort of higher tech net will use a low tech way of getting around that. Also, we had the Pony Express, which is very famous here in our country. Flags was a great way to symbolize to somebody else that could not hear you from a it was a great way to signal to somebody else that you could not have direct verbal communication with. In 1866, the semaphore flag system was developed and improved upon by Charles Palsy. And he basically came up with the concept very similar to Morse code system of positioning of flags to signal to somebody else. In our nations around the world also use flags to represent who you are and what type of country you come from or what social you come from. now we start getting into the more kind of modern, interesting things that we as hams do. And in 1843, the American government financed the construction of the first telegraph communication line. And it was set up between Washington and Baltimore. The first message in history was sent on May 24th, 1844 at 8:45 a.m. Morrison, Washington telegraphed to Vale in Baltimore, what hath God wrought? And then the U.S. discontinued using the telegraph system in 2006. Now that's fairly recent. In India, even went further. They discontinued their telegraph service on 2013. So we're talking a mere 10 years ago. I'm sure most of you guys recognize this guy, and it's kind of coming more into our lifetime. We're growing up knowing some of this technology and seeing the birth of it and witnessing the world coming closer together. This is kind of the first time in our world's history that we know of where you can have instant communication with somebody on the other side of the world, and they can have instant communication right back to you. Alexander Graham Bell in 1867, at first the benefits of the phone exchange were not exploited. It allowed telephones were paired to the subscribers who had arranged to have a contractor come out and put up a line, kind of like the tin can and the string put together. And then it just got more complicated because as more people became familiar with the technology and it became more common use, more lines needed to be added. And that was the beginning of the public switch telephone network. And you really don't see payphones around anymore. Now, these are kind of the forefathers of our modern day technology and communication. On the left, you have Maxwell, and he proposed the theory of electromagnetism with the mathematical proofs that showed that light and particles of radio and X-ray were all types of the electromagnetic field spectrum. And we've gone over quite a bit of this at the Elmer's classes, and it's really fascinating stuff to actually know that they're all related in some way. It's like the visible light to the radio spectrum to the infrared and back again. It's all connected in one way. And then Marconi went and took a step further, and he's the Italian inventor and an engineer that developed, demonstrated, and marketed the first successful long distance wireless telegraph. And in 1901, broadcast the first transatlantic radio signal. His company's Marconi Radio ended the isolation of ocean travel and pretty much saved hundreds of lives, including all the surviving passengers of the Titanic. And in 1909, he shared the Nobel Prize in Physics for his radio work. And then we have Heinrich Hertz, who was a brilliant German physicist and experimentist who demonstrated that the electromagnetic waves that were predicted by Maxwell actually existed. And he did it so well and was able to actually explain it to the common layperson that they actually named the measurement after him. This we know as the Hertz. And then we also see Bose, who's known as the father of wireless telecommunications. He invented the Mercury coherer, a radio wave receiver that was used by Marconi to build an operational two-way radio. The science behind capturing radio waves was first demonstrated by Bose. And then down at the bottom, kind of the father of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee, and in 1989, kind of kicked the World Wide Web out to us. Now, going back a little bit, and car-based telephones first tested at St. Louis in 1946. The system used a single large transmitter on top of a high-rise building. A single channel was used for sending and receiving, similar to our half duplex system. To talk, the user pushed the button and enabled a transmission, and then was able to receive afterwards. Thus, the coined term push to talk. And after that was the improved mobile telephone system, which was introduced in the 1960s. It used two channels, one for sending and one receiving, bringing telecommunications into full duplex mode. In the 1970s, private companies started developing their own systems to evolve the existing system further. Those private systems include the analog mobile phone system, the total access communication system, the Nordic mobile telephone, and the Japanese total access communication system. In 1982, Bell Labs developed the advanced mobile phone system, the AMPS, becoming the world's first generation 1G mobile network. The idea here was to divide the graphical areas into cells, and each cell was served by a base station so that frequencies reuse can be implemented. As a result, AMPS could support 5 to 10 times more users than the IMTS. Major concerns for the first generation was the weak security on the air interface and full analog mode that couldn't support any roaming or digital contacts. And then we started progressing into the digital, getting the 3G, the 4G, the 5G, now we have the 6G. And this is all so that way we can communicate with one another, be able to share the information, be able to talk and be human with one another. And with that, I ask, where are you going to bring it next? As amateur radios, part of us is we invent, we create, we experiment, and we also like to be in we also like to learn about other people's and how they operated and how they got things done. So, and that kind of brings me to the end of the presentation, and open to any questions and discussion.
That was really great, Shawn. Thank you. I have just a general comment to make.
Yeah.
That in the last week or so, I don't know what started me doing this, but I started getting really into watching ancient Egypt documentaries. And the thing that keeps jumping out at me is the hieroglyphs. You know, I keep looking at those and thinking about them, going, man, that form of communication. And before the slide that you showed them, that was my first thought. I was like, I hope you're going to show some hieroglyphs, because it's just something fascinating about that ancient language and the fact that we're reusing it now, as you mentioned, in pictographs.
In hieroglyphs are very unique and interesting because we don't actually have the sounds that go with all of the pictorials. And it wasn't until we discovered the Rosetta Stone that had Greek, that had the hieroglyphs, and we were able to actually translate some of the meanings. It wasn't until, was it cuneiform, and being able to pronounce any of those things, it's a lost tongue. And on the flip side of that, we've also created new words, things such as computers, lasers, scuba. you hear a news report from another country, and those words are going to pop out at you because they're the same in every language, because it is a new language. We've created a world language around technology because it's something that was discovered by the whole world and shared with the whole world.
John, what's your background?
Which background?
Your background as far as your what do you do personally, like your job or something like that?
Oh, I work for Department of Corrections, and with that, I have to communicate quite a bit. And prior to that, in the military, also quite a bit of communication. Schooling, I went to Sacred University, where I originally started off studying computer science, but moved more into the humanities, studying history, theology, and psychology. The main focus of my study was the old gods, the old kind of why people wanted to, or why people had these entities, these deities, these beings of power, and going from the Norse gods to the Egyptians to even some of the fables and stories of that. That's kind of my background, but I haven't been able to use it because past 14 years or so, I work in a prison, so we dabble in a whole bunch of different types of communication there.
Yeah, because you sound like you got a lot of background in education.
I'm just a student of life.
Yeah.
I'd like to be a jack of all trades and kind of master of some, where just experience traveling around the world, been different countries, gotten to interact with lots of different types of people, different cultures, different groups, different ideologies, and just getting a grand perspective of the world as a whole, and really trying to figure out what makes a human tick. Because how do you understand yourself, and how do you identify in the world around you? And that's kind of being able to learn those skills and what makes us tick as a human species. It's always fascinated me. So it's just kind of a topic that I enjoy.
Great presentation, thanks.
Just a comment. Hey, Shawn,
Yeah, Jim.
you mentioned earlier in the presentation about different type of hand signals. When I went to Greece, when I was stationed in Greece, one of the first things they told us is don't wave to people like this, because that's called throwing five, which is akin to when we, I guess you might say, throw one at somebody. Yeah. So it's kind of a rude gesture.
Yeah, and other hand gestures that we have when you salute in the military, or used to be the knights raising their visor to show that they were friendly. Also, the conquistadors, when they came over and were dealing with the Aztecs, they put out their hand to greet the natives, and natives took that as a sign of war. So it's different cultural things. In there's actually a country in, I think, Western Europe or Eastern Europe, where nodding your head actually means no and shaking it means yes.
I have a comment.
Go ahead, John.
I spent some time in China, and for example, there's a different sound between the Cantonese and the Mandarin.
Mm-hmm.
They have the same character, and sometimes they're talking to each other and they don't understand each other, and they hold out the palm of their hand and draw the character on their hand, and the person will look at the effect of drawing that character. Oh, I understand.
Yep. Yeah, that's very common in lots of parts of the world. Like I said, there's 7,000 spoken languages. In South America, There's a tribe, the Paria, and in their language, there's 10 sounds, 10 vocal sounds that a woman will make and 11 that a male will make. And they create an entire dialogue out of those sounds.
I have another comment, Shawn. It's actually ham related this time.
Yeah.
So one thing I really like recently that I learned was how accessible this hobby activity is for people with different abilities, right? So like Handy Ham, I didn't realize how much was out there for people who are disabled, and we also have like sign language and Braille for people who are visually disabled. And I know even a member of our club, she's not with us, is visually disabled. And it's fascinating how much you could do with ham radio, regardless of your abilities. I think that's an important part of communication.
Yeah, the technology that we have has been a great equalizer for all. You're basically able to get your thoughts, your mind out there to the world, regardless of your physical abilities. And that's been a good or bad thing. I mean, heard a quote recently. It's the world isn't getting stupider, it's just getting louder.
John, and good question. Do you think VoIP will replace radio?
The voice over internet protocol replacing radio? No. I don't think that it's going to replace it totally, because radio is a natural occurrence within our environment. So it's always going to be utilized. It's always going to be there. It's nature. It's like telling the sun not to rise in the east and set in the west. It's just part of the natural physics of our world is the radio spectrum. So will it be underutilized? Possibly, because generations will grow up utilizing a more efficient form of communication, which would be the VIOP, versus trying to set up a rig in the back of their vehicle or at their house. I mean, that takes a little bit of intelligence and effort and things of that nature. And many people, it's like, you'll know how to use a computer or use a car or stuff like that, but you don't know how to invent it. You don't know how to invent the microwave, but every household has one. So the user operation, yes, you're going to have those that are going to be using the VIOP, but I don't think it's going to 100% replace the ability to use radio as a form of communication, because it's just a natural occurring thing.
Couldn't you kind of look at it as the radio is the transport mechanism for the data, and VoIP is a data format?
Well, the VIOP is the voice over internet protocol. So yeah, it's a way of transferring the data. Sure, at some point it does go by radio wave, especially over a long distance.
Yeah, it could well go over microwave.
One of the newer movies, it's not that new actually, it's older than I thought. The Martian. There's an excellent series of scenes where he develops the need to communicate and with the Earth using hexadecimals and putting things out. It was actually a fascinating, and I thought an extremely well displayed example of how communications is critical. And once you get it going, you can sort of refine it more and more until it became, they were able to communicate much better when he had found the other spaceships that are rockets that were present on Mars. But it was very well done.
It's one thing that's kind of encoded into our DNA is communication. At birth, we are kind of given the ability to learn any of the languages available, but generally we only learn one or two. In starting off younger, you're more capable of learning multiple languages. And as you get older, your brain becomes less elastic to the concept of learning multiple languages, because it's kind of how you form your whole environment by giving it names and stuff. And
it's funny that you said communication is baked into the DNA, because that's what DNA is. It's communicating how to make a human. And everything else, all the RNA and everything else that comes out of it is from that. So it's really the like in the another science fiction movie, Contact, where they figured out the communications with the people from Vega, supposedly. But the communication book is right there. You just have to be able to translate it.
I read somewhere that they're teaching infants sign language because they don't have the verbal communication skills and they don't have teeth and they can't communicate through sound, but they can still communicate at a very young age, and they're teaching them to use signs to communicate, which I find kind of fascinating.
Yep, baby
Good
sign
drawing
language.
on the wall.
No, Shawn,
and
you were
those-
talking. Oh, you were talking about early telegraphy. I thought you might want to see this. This is a replica of the first Morse code key.
Oh,
And it has Alfred Vail's name on it. It was actually made by Kent Engineers in England. This is number 39, but it had all the elements of a modern key. It had a knob, it had a spring, it had a fulcrum. He was Morse's machinist, and a lot of people credit him to inventing a lot of the physical objects that Morse used. And I've read a few contradictory things. He may have a Connecticut connection. He may have gone to Yale, but he was, that's what the first, where you showed that picture of Morse transmitting from Baltimore to DC. They only used one wire, by the way. They jammed the rest of it through ground. They didn't really understand it. It would be a lot more efficient if you used two wires.
A lot more expensive though.
Morse College was named after Samuel Morse. So you were correct. There is a strong Yale connection. The whole college is named after him. In fact, W1YU, when trying to get on the air, tried to secure a room at Morse College. We thought it would be quite fitting, but they, of course, didn't give it to us. So
How's FT8 college doing?
The what?
How is FT8 college coming?
I don't know.
Well,
There is a Vail
of-
house in New Jersey that shows a lot of the accomplishments of Alfred Vail.
Speaking of FT8, Shawn, I've got a query. You still listening?
yeah, good.
So as far as an up for amateur radio right now, we seem to be peaking at FT4 mode. Not everybody agrees with it, but I think it's where current technology is at. Where do you think we are beyond FT4 or FT8 mode? As far as communications for amateur radio? Or do you have an opinion?
Well, I guess my opinion would be very ambiguous and not answer the question directly, because there is really no limit to the imagination of a human. It's just another one of our skills is we create tools. We find a problem or we find something that needs a solution, and we create, we invent. So there's no idea as to where the possibilities of communication can go. I mean, we can probably get FT 3 billion if we wanted to.
No, you can't.
No.
Limitation is bandwidth. The higher you go in speed, the more frequencies in kilohertz you use up.
Yeah, but through some sort of division of that bandwidth.
Well, yeah, but you have to slow it down to do that, unless you go into phase modulations, things like that, which would eliminate hams because they're too expensive to reproduce.
Right, but in time to come, when those technologies become more accessible, or other future technologies that, I mean, quantum computers and stuff might be able to address and bridge some of those issues as well. That's why I said it's kind of a ambiguous answer that I was going to give towards where do I think it's going to go. I have no idea where it's going to go because who knows what technology we might come up with. We might have a future club member join Mark that comes up with a brand new mode of communication.
I think telepathy is the next frontier.
My understanding is that information theory says there is a limit to how much information can be sent through a certain channel, certain bandwidth with a certain amount of noise. And the modes like FT8 are nearing the theoretical limits. So JT65 can work with a weaker signal than FT8, but it takes more time to send the same information. And FT4 isn't quite as good as FT8, but it again takes less time. So you got three modes that are very, very similar, FT4, FT8, and JT65. The more time you spend sending the same data, the weaker signal you can receive at the other end. But all three modes, given their own parameters, are very near the theoretical limit. I don't think there's much more we're going to go.
Yeah, the theoretical limit put forth by, was it Farnsworth, Planck, and
there was someone named
Meriden.
Shannon. Shannon came up with information theory.
Yeah, and then Feynman's theory of finitism of data communications. There is going to be a limit, but then we always kind of, once we hit that one limit, we then start gearing up towards another, once what is it, not Ohm's law,
Murphy's law.
yeah,
Moore's law.
the reproducing of microchips, where
Yeah,
we
that's
get
Moore's law.
Moore's law.
Yeah.
Yeah, once we get towards the ends of Moore's law, it actually starts creating another curve.
Weren't JT65 and FT4 and 8 were all created by Joe Taylor, were they not?
Yep.
JT?
Actually, the kids that work for him.
Yeah.
That's Princeton, Ed.
But his Nobel Prize was in discovering pulsars, or to a large degree. There's a possibility we may be able to get him to come up to talk. We're working on that, but these are good questions to ask him if we can do that.
He's from the area.
One thing I'd like to point out before we get too far afield, when you talk about theoretical limits, I take you guys back. The so-called sound barrier was a limit that people thought could not be crossed. And the problem was solved by better technology to build airplanes that could exceed the speed of sound. So saying something will never be solved or never happened, I never think of that as a good course. Just say, we don't know. So far, we can't. But saying never, probably going to get you into hot water more often than not. And,
If you put never in our time frame, it may be never.
well, yeah, I mean, stuff like that, not in our time, but it doesn't mean never.
Yeah.
The possibility is always there. You have to keep your mind open to the possibility because you don't know what somebody down the road may come up with that will solve the problem. If you look at a lot of
I'm going to counter that just a little bit. Sorry, but when somebody says you can't go faster than the speed of light, that's real. So there were people who said you couldn't go faster than the speed of sound. Yet when they said that, artillery shells were already going faster than the
bullets
speed
were
of
going
sound.
faster, exactly.
So-
That's why a lot of people said you're wrong because there were
right.
examples.
But
you know?
I think some of these other issues we're discussing have a very, very solid theoretical underpinning. So
What-
it's not like someone's going to make a better screwdriver and with it we're going to build a better machine and that's going to solve the problem.
Well, my point is, don't give up on
Go
trying.
faster than the speed of light. How do you explain cosmic inflation? That's something I've never been able to reconcile. How can everything in micro nanoseconds be so far apart if you can't go faster than the speed of light?
Well, wait a second. So you didn't
Now you're starting
know.
to talk about quarks,
you had
neutrinos,
that.
and tachyons. And tachyons, once they start losing energy, they speed up. So it's a
Oh, okay, but wait a second.
phenomenon that we're not able to measure yet.
But you have to look at what kind, when you have a limit, you have to ask, where does it come from? Okay, so a theoretical limit would be like the speed of, and that will never be broken as long as your theory of relativity applies to your situation. Now, can you create environments in which the theory of relativity does not apply? Well, we wouldn't know that, but if you could, then you get around it. Other than that, Shannon's limit is a theoretical limit, assuming something about the structure of information. You get around that, find a way to avoid his structure of information. The speed of sound, the airplanes, was practical. The airplanes would fall apart because they couldn't be made strong enough. But that was a practical limit. The point artillery shells already went faster. Moore's law, there the limit is practical. The chips get too hot when the transistors are too close together. That's a practical limit. But it might be a practical limit we don't overcome. Yeah. But that would get answered practically. What's another theoretical limit? Well, energy is a theoretical limit. E equals mc squared. We think of it as this means there's massive potential for energy, which is true. But the flip side of that is it's actually a limit. If you have a certain amount of mass, there's a theoretical limit of what energy you're going to get out of it, and you won't beat it. As long as the theory of relativity applies. So some limits are simply practical. Your airplane frame falls apart if you go up to supersonic speeds, but if you can build a better airframe, then you overcome it. So if you know what kind of limit is, then you know your prospects for finding some way around it. And you don't always have a way around it. What heat death of the universe? Yeah, that's the one. Entropy. You're never going to beat entropy.
Hey, Shawn, I have a quick comment to kind of take the original question to you in a bit of a different ham radio direction.
Yeah.
So one of the things I absolutely love about ham radio and what really appealed to me to push me to get my license is a comment my dad made to me years ago. And maybe we have a little bit of doomsday prepper in our DNA, but he said, when all else fails, radio will always be there. And when the question was first asked to you, where do you see it going? That question is, to me, always answered by, I don't really care, because radio waves are going to be there. And that's my appeal of ham radio. It's the analog foundation of it. It's kind of a topical subject nowadays. People are freaking out about things that could potentially happen, but it's real, and people are prepping and thinking about communications if certain systems go down.
I can't agree with you more. It's to me, it's a tool that our universe, our reality provides to us. It's something that is part of our environment that they're given to the entire world to be able to utilize if you have the kind of intelligence and equipment to be able to access it, or be able to create that equipment to access it. Me personally, I know I'm not getting my letter to Hogwarts or getting off to over the rainbow or anything else. This is the HT is the computer is kind of my magic. It's the being able to do something that I can't do within my physical form. So that's why I like the ham radio and being a radio operator. Also, and like I said, encoded into DNA is the drive to communicate, to connect with other people and learn. It's about our experiences, and that's what makes up our kind of anthology of life, is the chain of experiences that we have, and being able to communicate those experiences is part of just being a human and enjoying the humanness.
Hey, Shawn, I have a brief announcement I'd like to make before I leave for another net when you have a moment.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Just in case anyone was not aware of it, Ann, our member, K1STM, had a accident Friday night. She fell and broke her hip. So she's currently out of the hospital into rehab as of today. So more to follow as we know it, but I thought at least everybody in the net to know about it.
Boy, don't we know about it.
Pardon?
I said, boy, don't we know about it.
Yeah. And the second thing real quick, John B., can you, I'll give you a shout after the net. I have some traffic that came through the Westcon net for you.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, you got to join it once in a while.
Well, I missed it. Okay.
Okay. All right, guys, I got to take off for another net. So very informative. Very good. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Hi, John.
I just want to point out a couple of things that Shawn talked about. He was talking about the first switching telephone stuff. Well, the first automated switch for the telephone company was in Liggets, or by Liggets down in New Haven on Church and Chapel. So we have a little claim to fame there. First cellular switch was in Chicago. In those days, there was two companies, AT&T. Well, actually, it was
the first telephone.
Western Electric and Motorola.
Liggets, there's a name from the past.
Yeah.
The first telephone book was in New Haven.
Yeah.
All right, I'll ask. What's a Liggets?
Drugstore. It was like every Walmart or Evergreens or whatever. It's just a name.
It was the malt shop, Rick.
1957, Connecticut was the first state to have all dial telephones, all rotary phones.
Yeah.
Southington was the last city to do away with the, I think the dial tone or the rotary phone or something like that. Southington was very far behind in their telephone system.
Well, there were a lot of them. There was one up in Maine that they didn't have dial tone until the, I think 80s or 90s. Everything was done with cord boards.
It was tone dialing. Southington was the last city in the Connecticut to have the tone dial.
I'm talking about this, it's in Maine. I forgot the name of it. Something Lake, Maine.
A switchboard.
Yeah, my wife knew a lady that lived up there. And they had the old cord board. They'd plug in and spin the generator and ring the phone.
They were the people that had it were on Johnny Carson. You see that rerun every once in a while.
Oh yeah. Just I can remember the name of it. Name of the town.
I used to ride my bicycle all around, and I'd have to memorize where payphones were in case I got stuck somewhere.
Yeah.
There's still a working one up in the center of town in Wallingford. It's in nice condition.
Yeah, it's not working through the phone company. Took a lot of circuitry to keep the payphones working. Had to have all those coin returns and counting mechanisms. And it wasn't worth it. We couldn't charge extra money for it, so we shot them.
Had a great meeting tonight.
Indeed.
Can I make a quick public service announcement? It's actually kind of for two people here.
Sure.
It's mainly for Dave or Shawn. I don't know if you guys have heard, if you're doing a POTA up a Sleeping Giant, but there's been a lot of bear sightings up there. So be careful if you're going up there, bring your bear spray.
Yeah, it's also tick season. I found a couple on me yesterday after I got in.
They're almost worse than bears.
Yeah.
And more dangerous.
Yep.
Well, you could always bring your bear repellent, 9mm or 45.
No, you
That's
just bring
Bo-
the POTA
that's
partner
Bob
that runs
FYL.
slower.
Bob
had a
FYL
question.
got tick bite. I think he fought it for 3 years.
We have a
You know
question
that
from
better.
Ian. We have a question from Ian in the chat. W1IKW. Information theory was proposed by Claude Shannon in the 40s. It wasn't a question, just a comment, I guess.
No, I thought it was.
I
I
think
thought
that
it
was
was.
written well before.
I thought it was Del Shannon in the 50s, but I guess not. I don't know.
They still don't know what you're talking about.
They know Liggets, but they don't know Del Shannon.
No, I know Liggets. I know Del Shannon. Most of
There
the
you go.
rest of them are what?
Yeah.
Como se dice en inglés, por favor?
¿Cómo estás, señor?
One of the things about communication or the transmission of knowledge, I can't imagine how much further our technology would be if the Caesar or whomever hadn't burned down the library at Alexandria, where so much knowledge that we had to rediscover I assume, you guys may know more than I, that was lost when that was burned down. Some of you may be aware of the Antikythera Mechanism. You've at least heard of it.
Yeah.
And, there was a computer-based device that was discovered that was several thousand BC old. It was discovered, I believe, in 1910 by divers of a ship off the island of Antikythera in storm. The divers were going looking for oysters, and they thought they found this huge oyster. And they put it on the deck, and when the sun baked it, it split apart, and they saw metal. And it turned out to be a device that was designed to predict the phases of the moon, eclipses, the dates, calendars of Olympics in years to come. And but the amazing part of it, in addition to all the gears and so forth, was that the gear teeth were designed with such precision that nobody would have believed they could have possibly built that thousands of years ago. And there it was. And
They
that-
also use sawtooth instead of square tooth.
I'm sorry?
They use sawtooth instead of square tooth in the geometry for the mathematics of figuring out the gear ratio for a sawtooth. Is the precision goes down to pi of the 20th digit. So for them to be able to figure out what pi was and then be able to divide it up from there, from the 10th digit, was an extreme feat. In other ancient technologies, like the Baghdad battery, there's depictions in hieroglyphs of the potential use of what we would call a flashlight, a flameless torch. So yeah, most likely aliens did give it to them. But we also we had some pretty brilliant ancestors. The Homo erectus they had mentioned earlier, they were kind of our tool makers, our fathers of fire, really. And that's what separates us as far as being able to work with our environment compared to other species. We're the only species that can control fire. And from that, we've gained the knowledge of electricity, being able to split the atom, and who else knows where we're going to be able to go. At one point, we thought there was only 4 elements, and then we find this whole periodic chart. And now we're even going smaller than that. We were talking about the cosmic rays and the background. And it's like now we're getting into tachyons and neutrinos and stuff of that nature. We don't know how big things go or how small things go, because we can only see from our perspective. And it's just learning as much as we can about our environment and also doing it peacefully. It's like, how do you communicate with somebody else? It's do it peacefully, do it with hostility, and try and find openness and common ground, and be an all-around good human and be a good citizen of the world.
Not everybody's wired that way.
Oh, I understand. That's how I make my
That's the
money,
problem.
dealing with those people that don't understand that.
No. All right, well, it's 8:28. This has been one of the most stimulating sessions I've been able to attend. This was really quite remarkable. Are there other comments? I don't want to cut things off prematurely.
Thank you, Shawn.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
Shawn, thank you
Thanks,
very
Shawn.
much.
Yeah,
Thank
very
you,
good,
Shawn.
Shawn.
Very good.
Very informative, Sean.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks,
Shawn.
Shawn.
Thank you.
Nothing more from the chat, Ed?
Okay, so did your frog reproduce? We now have two of them?
Well, that's Rick. He took an actual picture too while you left that thing up there all alone by himself, lonely, and
I
wondering
found the
about his,
frog up at the
future.
OEM. Come on. I took my own picture. It's legit.
That's what I said. What was I saying? You interrupted me, Rick.
Here it
My
is.
apologies, Rob.
How
Here it is.
disrespectful of you. Just teasing.
Here he
Hey,
is, Rob,
Bart,
alive and well,
how's your brother doing?
waving. It's right here.
What did you say, John? I didn't
I
hear.
asked Bart how his brother was doing.
Yeah.
You still here, Bart? I guess not.
Double muted. That's the problem.
Hey,
He's not doing
Rob.
well.
I have a question about your email you sent earlier about the using the EOC on Saturdays.
Yeah, sure.
Can we use the backyard at any time we want? I have a QRP antenna I want to play with, and I want to test it up on a hill, and that seems convenient.
Yeah, no reason not to, Jeff. No reason not to.
Awesome.
Go over to the football field too.
Yeah. Yep.
You got good elevation there. It's pretty good elevation there.
I finally bit the bullet and bought a ICOM 705 last week.
Nice.
And a couple different wire antennas I want to tinker with.
Shawn, thank you. Very enjoyable, Shawn. I'm going to jump to an 8:30 Ed, but I want to thank you for a nice presentation.
Thanks, bud.
Okay, any other comments? We can adjourn the meeting. You're certainly welcome to stay and chat.